Today's webinar is entitled, How to Beat the FE Exam Without Beating Your Head. And our presenter today is RIT alumnus Joel Irway, EIT. Joel graduated with a BS in Mechanical Engineering Technology in 2009. He's the author of the #1 ranked study guide on Kindle, 30-Minute EIT, How to Beat the FE Exam Without Beating Your Head. And he has been helping engineers pass the Fundamentals of Engineering exam for the past 3 years. He's also the owner of www.dailyfeexamprep.com, a video blog dedicated to providing engineers and students short, informative, multimedia resources to pass the FE exam. Joel resides in Rochester with his wife, Mary Jo, and he's here on campus with us today. So I'm pleased to introduce Joel.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Christine. I'm very excited to be here, and I can tell by the attendance today that there is a lot of interest in this topic. Great. Well, I guess we will go ahead and get started. So, as Christine mentioned, I'm Joel Irway, author of the #1 ranked Kindle study guide, 30-Minute EIT, How to Beat the FE Exam Without Beating Your Head. And over the past 3 years, I have been helping engineers of all sorts pass this test simply by reshaping the way that they approach the exam. And my goal is that by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to walk away with clear instructions for how you can rethink your approach to this exam and pass it on your next attempt. So the agenda for today will be structured like this. Go ahead and get to the right slide. There we go. So the agenda for today is going to be structured like this. First, I'm going to start with my story about when I took the exam, why I developed my approach, and how I came up with it. Then we're going to get right into the main meat of the content, which is the FE focus formula. And this is the actual approach that my students have told me is the single most important method that helps reshape their attention towards the exam. Next, we're going to talk about the FE blueprint. And this essentially takes the formula that we just used and maps out our study plan per the amount of time that we're able to study prior to the exam. Then we're going to talk about FE cruise control, which will help anyone who fears the math-related subjects because they've been out of school for a while or for any other reason. This will help put their minds at ease and actually turn those subjects into some of their strongest subjects nearly overnight. And finally, we're going to discuss the single biggest mistake that examinees make when approaching the FE exam. And as an added bonus at the end of the webinar, I'm going to give you links to free tools that I use daily to overcome this mistake. Even if you don't decide to take the FE exam, these tools are going to change your daily work habits immediately. So that's what we're going to cover, and let's go ahead and get started. I took the FE exam in the fall of 2009. At the time, I was a junior mechanical engineer working for an architecture and engineering firm doing HVAC design. I didn't have much exposure to what it took to become a licensed PE, so I was pretty unclear as to if I really needed it or not. But after a few months, the benefits of having a PE license were pretty apparent. If I were to look at the top-level engineers in my company, all of them had their license. So in the early summer, my friend had approached me about taking the FE exam and studying for it together. And I took some time to contemplate my decision because I knew it was a big one. I looked at the exam specifications, and immediately I leaned towards not taking the exam. At first glance, it looked like a behemoth final exam for my entire college degree. I was considering the general exams since I didn't have a heck of a lot of industry experience yet. So I started to look at the subjects. There was chemistry, a ton of math and calculus, thermodynamics, electricity, and at the time, biology was on there too. A group of subjects stood out, and those were my weakest areas: chemistry, biology, and electricity. I was a mechanical engineering student, and these subjects scared me. I was overcome by a sense of overwhelm, fear, frustration, and doubt. I thought, this is so much material, and I've been out of school for a while. Some of these subjects I never even took in college. Where do I even start? And as soon as I started thinking that, I thought about my future and how it was going to be halted by not earning my credentials. I thought that I was going to have to be content with a low ceiling on my career because there's no way I'm going to be able to pass this test. Like probably most of you, I kept saying to myself, I have other obligations and not enough time in the day to prepare for a test like this. The doubt poured in, and I was almost buried. Until I talked to my friend again. He had convinced me that because he had the same feelings, but he said that if we did it together, then we'd be able to pull each other through it. It was going to require long days and nights and lots of study hours to prepare for this. So we decided to focus and take the leap together, all in. We signed up for an online review course that was to be taught over the course of 6 consecutive weekends for 8 hours each Saturday and Sunday, and they were going to provide a crash course on every subject on the exam. Okay, so this seemed like a perfect solution, right? But in reality, it ended up being a $600 mistake that nearly cost me a passing score, and actually it cost my friend his. During the second week of the course, I remember sitting in the class second-guessing my decision to take the course. The instructor would frequently have to stop to answer questions, and the entire process was just so inefficient that I decided I had to change something. I remember it was during the electricity and magnetism course because that was one of my weakest subjects. I thought that was where I was going to learn the most, but it was exactly the opposite. I was a mechanical engineer, and the electrical subjects just didn't sink in. After that session, I completed some sample problems and completely bombed them. It was like I had learned nothing. I was so frustrated and almost quit. Thankfully, I didn't, but I knew that I had to change something or I definitely wasn't going to pass the test. So I looked at how much the electrical section of my exam was worth, and I compared that to how much of the test I thought I had to answer correctly to pass, and I devised a makeshift study plan based on my strongest and weakest subjects. In the end, I used the time during a review course to study on my own, using my own review materials and my new study plan, and my buddy continued down the path of the review course. Needless to say, I passed and he didn't. In fact, when he took the exam the second time, he used my approach to pass. And I knew that my method wasn't a fluke because I shared it with a couple of other engineering friends who failed the FE exam on their first attempt, and then used my method on their second attempt and passed. The fact of the matter is, our engineering careers depend on this test, and the way that I passed the test was because I developed a clear map for success using a calculated, minimalistic approach. So let's take a quick poll. How many of you are currently registered to take the FE exam? So it looks like we have a couple minutes or a couple of seconds here while we're closing the poll. And let's take a look at the poll results. So it looks like we've got actually pretty interesting results here. I've done a few of these polls before, and usually it's split down the middle, but here we've got a strong majority of people who haven't registered to take the exam. So that's good. I mean, you're obviously thinking about it, and hopefully these strategies are going to help you as you, hopefully it'll help convince you to take the exam and reshape your focus so you know how to do it correctly. So let's get right into the meat of the content, and I'm going to share with you now the exact strategy that hundreds of other engineers have used to pass the FE exam, and it's what I call the FE focus formula. So the first step that I want you to do is it's important to go to NCEES, the NCEES website, and obtain a copy of the exam specification for the test that you'll be taking. Here, you are going to see every subject on the exam as well as a range of number of questions that they may ask you pertaining to that particular subject. NCEES doesn't publish a hard passing score for the exam since each exam is graded differently based on the performance of students on that test. But according to Michael Lindbergh, author of some FE review materials and manuals, he wrote that the passing score in recent years has been somewhat less than 50%. Now this is critical because it's important to determine a baseline score to aim for in order to prioritize what subjects we should focus on. So I tell all of my students to aim for 60% correct just to be safe. The format of the new computer-based test is 110 questions over a 6-hour time period. Since we know the total number of questions that will be on the exam and we have a range of the number of possible questions per subject, we need to list out all of the subjects with the potential number of questions. So I've shown an example here, and this is the mechanical engineering exam. So what I've done is I've listed the subjects on the left and included 2 columns for low range and high range on the right. I divided each range by the total number of questions on the exam to get an idea for the total possible percentage that subjects could occupy on the test. As you can see, thermodynamics ranges from 13 questions to 20 questions. It can occupy as much as 18% of the total examination. In contrast, electricity and magnetism only occupies at most 4.5% of the total exam. So if we reflect back on my story I told in the beginning of the presentation, once I realized that my weaker subjects represent very little of the exam and that I probably only needed to shoot for about 60% of the goal, the weight of this subject turned out to be very little. It's important to realize that the range makes it more difficult for examinees to prepare because we really have no idea how many questions of each subject will be on the exam. This gives less consistency for the test takers, but there's still a way to prepare for it. We need to break down the subjects and categorize them by order of our strengths. So what we do now is we break down our strongest, mediocre, and weakest subjects and label them as A, B, and C categories. Category A will be the subjects that we feel we can answer at least 85% of the questions correctly. Category B will be the subjects that we feel we can at least answer 60% of the questions correctly. Category C are subjects that we only need to answer 25% of them correctly. So take a minute to really notice those percentages. Obviously, our A category will be our strongest subjects and where we will spend the most amount of our time. But look at our C category. We're anticipating getting only 25% of these answers correct. In fact, odds tell us that for multiple choice questions that have 4 options, we have a 25% chance of getting them correct if we just guessed. Now, I'm not saying that you should completely neglect preparing for these subjects, but you should definitely not spend a lot of time on them. I recommend learning just basic definitions in this category to familiarize yourself with potential easy questions that may be asked. Okay, so next we need to calculate the percent total from each column and multiply it by the percentage of anticipated correct answers. But you might be wondering how we compensate for the range factor that I talked about earlier. Well, we assume worst case scenario and plan that our strongest subjects will have the least number of questions possible, and our weaker subjects will have the most number of questions possible. This gives us a little cushion and wiggle room entering the exam, since the odds are highly unlikely for this to actually occur. So here's what my chart looked like using the ABC approach for the mechanical engineering exam. The sum percentage of each column is listed at the bottom. So take note of these percentages because we'll be using them on the next slide. Remember, this is just the total percentage of questions that we anticipate being on the exam, assuming worst case scenario with low and high ranges. So next, what we need to do is we need to multiply those summarized values by the anticipated percentage of correct answers. For example, column A would be the sum total of the low range percentage of each subject times our anticipated percentage of correct answers, which is 41.5% times 85% correct, for a total correct value of 35.2%. That means that we'll be planning on getting 35.2% of the test correct from subjects under our A column. Repeat this for B and C and then summarize the total. For this example, we get a total value of 61.3% correct, which is great and means that we've met our goal. That's the power of this categorizing technique. We can now define exactly what subjects are our strongest ones and where we should spend the most time preparing. But perhaps more importantly, we can define our weakest subjects and know where we shouldn't focus a whole lot of our time. So what happens if you didn't hit your 60% goal? Well, this probably means that you had too many subjects in your B and C column and not enough in your A column. So take another look and start moving subjects around so you get closer to that 60% goal. What happens if you're much higher than 60%? Well, usually you have too many items in your A column and not enough in your B and C. This isn't necessarily a problem, but you might want to shift some subjects so you don't overstudy and stress yourself out trying to learn too much. Remember, our goal is not 100% to pass. The examination expects us not to get them all correct, so don't try and get them all correct. So now that we know the FE focus formula, we can take that and apply it to map out our study. We can take that and apply it to map out our study plan and our study schedule. And we can create our FE blueprint. While the FE focus formula is designed to provide clarity for what you should be focusing on, the FE blueprint will translate that into an actionable study plan based on your available time and how long you have until the exam. So let's take a look at an example. The first step is to define your basic information, such as date of the test and the amount of time that you're willing to commit each day. Your daily commitment is important, and it should all depend on how much time you have left before your exam. The example that I give right now is for one of my current students. She actually studied about a month prior to filling out the FE blueprint, so she ultimately will have about 11 or 12 weeks of total study prep time under her belt. So we just defined their criteria based on the subjects that she had left to study. Now, the target study hours per night is just an average. I know it's not realistic for us to study every night, but you may have more time on the weekends to make up for some busy nights during the week where you might have missed some hours. The typical average that my students study is typically between 1.5 to 2.5 hours per night. So the key is here to multiply your target study hours per day by the number of days remaining so we can distribute the number of hours to our subjects. So the next step is to take our FE focus formula and transfer the A, B, C categories. We do this so we can establish the appropriate amount of focus to each subject. So you might be asking, what is the appropriate amount of focus? You'll see in the boxes that I've highlighted in red that I recommend that we spend 60% of our time available on our A subjects since we've identified them as our subjects where we will get the most points. I recommend that we spend about 30% of our time on the B subjects and only about 10% of our time on C subjects and general review. The percentages allow us to apply the appropriate number of days to each subject for each category, which we'll then use to develop our study calendar. You'll see at the bottom of each category will be a total number of hours per subject, number of days per subject, and number of weeks per subject. This is simply calculated based on the number of days remaining, number of subjects remaining in the category, and the percentage of time to allot to each subject based on the category. Now, a quick note on the C subjects. We should really only be studying the absolute bare bones, basic information to familiarize ourselves with the topics. I truly believe that with every subject on the exam, NCEES gives us a couple of gimme questions or questions that can most likely be found through a definition or formula directly referenced in the supplied reference handbook. So our goal for the C's is to be able to identify those gimmies, and that's it. You might have seen the dark gray box at the bottom dedicated for practice exams and review time. I like to block out 3 days for my students for final review before the exam as a refresher, and I deduct those days from those 3 days from the C column because those are the least important subjects. So finally, I'll take the total number of days that I calculated based on my percentages for each category and map out the calendar. I've color-coded each subject in each column to make it more visually appealing, but you can do whatever works best for you. And we know exactly how many days to study for each subject because that was calculated out in the previous step. In this example, we had 7 days for each A subject, 3 days for each B, and 1 to 2 days for the C subjects. The peach box at the end of the calendar is the test date, and the 3 gray boxes prior to that are meant for practice exams and general review. My students have found this extremely helpful to keep them on track with their goals. Some of them have adjusted this slightly based on their strengths, but for those who don't really know where to get started, this is great. Okay, so let's take another poll. How many of you have taken the FE exam before? Okay, so I think we've got a good majority of the people who have submitted responses, and it looks like most of you haven't taken it before, and we've got a couple people who have taken it before. So, you know, I hope this is starting to make sense, especially for the people who have taken it before, and trying to clear some things up and some common myths on trying to learn it all and really avoiding that overwhelm. So hopefully this has helped those who have taken it before, and for those who are preparing now or considering it, I really hope that this is starting to clear up some confusion. So let's move on to the next topic, which is what I call FE cruise control. Now, FE cruise control is all about using the tools available to help you solve the math-related subjects for you so you don't have to. And it always blows me away by how many people don't utilize this. Excuse me. Now, I don't want you to mistake this for not having to study for the math-related sections. You'll still need to have a good understanding for the process of solving them, but what I'm about to show you will not only save you time, but also eliminate a lot of guesswork. I always like to start out this section with a story of my in-test experience because this really paints a picture of what students are prepared for this test and which ones aren't. So about 3 minutes into my morning exam, I gazed around the room to get a better sense of the situation. Now, naturally, I've always been a procrastinator, and test taking was just another example. At the time, it was an 8-hour test, and I needed to calm myself over the anxiety of what was staring me in the face. To my immediate right was an empty chair with a name tag. I thought about where this person could be. Maybe they overslept, or the exam was too much to bear, so they quit without even trying. 2 rows ahead of me was a young man, probably still in college, dressed in a gray hoodie with his face down on the desk. Now, maybe he read the first couple of pages, of the exam and fainted, or maybe he was so hungover from partying the night before and this was his form of remedy. And I didn't need to look behind me because I could hear everything. It was just thump, 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 thump. His nervous legs bouncing from so much anticipation and so many energy drinks that this test taker was on pace to finish the morning exam in a record 3.5 minutes. And scattered throughout the room, I saw maybe 3 or 4 hopefuls who were so calm that they must have endured all this before. Maybe they knew exactly what to expect, but they were definitely prepared. I'm not talking about prepared like those individuals who bring a main calculator, a backup calculator in case their first one dies, and then another backup and a spare set of batteries just in case. You know who you are if you're one of these people. So rather, I'm talking about prepared so they know the exam booklet well enough to know exactly which areas to tackle first. They flipped to a specific spot in the reference book because they had studied that book just as thoroughly. They were punching numbers into their calculators and getting it to spit out the answers they needed. Without hesitation, they were flying through each question. I gazed at them only for a few seconds, but I understood that they were definitely going to pass. Now, preparation is key, and knowing how to use the tools available to you is about as important as the subjects in your A column. There are questions on the exam that I call gimmies, because they can be found in your reference handbook that is provided for you in the exam. Think of the reference manual as our get out of jail free card when we're in a difficult situation. Some answers on the exam are taken directly from the reference manual, and unless you study the reference manual prior to the exam, you'll never know that they're in there and won't know where to look. Plus, NCEES loves to throw in questions that sound advanced when they're really not. They'll try to use industry terminology to throw the reader off and confuse them, but don't be fooled. There's a good chance that the correct answer is right in the handbook. For example, Laplace transforms are a common type of problem that may be asked in the calculus section, but did you know that there's actually information on Laplace transforms in the electrical and computer engineering section? You might not have. So spend some time reading the supplied reference handbook. It may be what makes a difference on your test. Okay, an engineer's best friend is always their calculator, and you probably know that. Your calculator allows you to easily solve some of the problems in the math-related sections, and this is going to free up valuable study time and problem-solving time during the exam. I found it ridiculous that some people bring the most basic calculator without any additional functionality. They obviously didn't check out the features that other calculators had to offer for them. The calculator that you choose is so important and so helpful that I recommend to all of my students that the math-related sections should all be nested under their A column because the calculators can solve a lot of them for you. Not only that, but it will also save you a ton of time during the exam. My calculator of preference is the Casio FX115 ES Plus for its natural multi-line display and calculus functionality. Let me show you an example. Matrices and vectors were a major problem for me studying for this exam. They took a lot of time to solve, and I wasn't 100% confident in solving them. But I knew my calculator could solve it quickly and easily, and I never had to second guess myself. This example asks us for the determinant of the following matrix. Working this out by hand could easily take a few minutes, but using the calculator only takes a few seconds, and I know the answer is correct. I've labeled each problem with a level of difficulty and a calculator advantage value. For this example, the advantage is extreme because matrices can take a long time to solve, and with one slip up, your answer will be incorrect. Using the calculator, it only takes around 15 to 25 seconds to solve. So learning how to use my calculator inside and out was one of the most valuable ways that I earned serious points on the exam and saved me a ton of preparation headache from not having to learn how to solve them by hand. Okay, so let's take one last quick poll. What's the one thing that worries you most about the FE exam? So I think for this one, because we couldn't do a yes or no poll, we're just going to take some answers in the chat box. If you want to go ahead and send some answers in the chat box, we'll read them off and get a little bit of engagement. Okay, so we've got a couple concerns that have been coming through here. We've got the amount of material covered, running out of time. You're just bad at standardized testing, managing my time. Okay. Graduated my bachelor's almost 2 years ago. So you haven't worked in engineering for 15 years. Okay, so kind of not knowing where to start and content overwhelm, I'm assuming. Being tested on subjects that I've never seen and spending too much time per question. Okay, so let's go ahead and tackle some of these questions. Can we scroll up to the top and we'll work our way down? Amount of material covered. Hopefully these strategies that I've talked about will convince you that you don't need to learn everything that's on the exam and really want to prioritize on your strongest subjects. So really calculating out what your A's, B's, and C's are will hopefully help eliminate that concern of that content overwhelm. Christopher writes, running out of time is his biggest concern. That is a major concern. Back when the test was, before it was computer-based, it was an 8-hour exam, and there were 220 questions. So I think they've tried to eliminate that by cutting the number of questions in half, but I think they are now becoming more complex. So the answers are going to require a little bit more time to solve. But really, that's going to be focused on maximizing your A subjects and really hammering home those your strongest subjects. So hopefully that will help. I'm just bad at standardized testing. Says, is that from Robert?
Robert.
Okay, so Robert, bad at standardized testing. I really hope that some of these strategies helped ease some of those fears. Standardized testing is difficult. I wasn't the greatest at it. Case in point, my SAT scores were very low, but it was interesting to see how this strategy has helped kind of change a lot of students who were bad at standardized testing. Okay, rushing through the questions, I think that was also kind of mentioned above. So managing my time, we also kind of tackled that. So managing my time on PT, so I have enough for, on part 1, so I have enough for part 2, and knowing when to quit. Dennis, thank you for that question. That is really going to be about, you want to focus your time on your strongest questions. So we really want to focus the bulk of our time on our A's and B's. So what I tell my students is whenever you come across a question on the exam that might be in your C column, I tell them to skip over it. You wait until the very, very end of the test so you can really focus your time and effort on the more difficult questions that require more energy on your A's and B's. So once you get through your A's and B's, then you go back to your C's, and if you don't know the answer within 5 or 10 seconds, if you don't know where to look for it, what you do is you pick one letter and you make that your guess letter. And so for every question that you guess on, you pick the same letter, and that will hopefully give you at least 25% correct on those questions. So it's just a simple strategy that will help, first of all, give you more time on the questions that you need, and will hopefully help boost those C questions at least to 25% correct, if not above. Okay, Nancy says, I graduated my bachelor's in electrical engineering almost 2 years ago. Haven't worked in engineering in 20 years, and looking to get back into it. Great, that's exciting. It's especially for people who have been out of school for a while, and this is a very, very common concern. If you've been out of school for a while, you take a look at the exam, and you really just get this big sense of fear saying, I don't even know where to start, or there's way too much content on here to tackle, and I don't want to relearn it all. Well, the fact of the matter is you can relearn this in 10 to 12 weeks at most. Some people have done it in less time, And hopefully what I've showed you is to really focus on what your strongest subjects are. So what's going to take the least amount of time to relearn? What is fresh in your head? Maybe it's math, maybe it's probability, maybe it's circuits or controls. And then you really focus that and make that your A subject. Excuse me. And after that, you just work your way down through your A's and your B's and really pick out 3 or 4 subjects that are going to be in your C column. You could just almost toss them out. Search for them in your reference handbook and learn the reference handbook. If you can find any gimmies, great, but if not, pick one letter and just plow through it. And Stephen says, being tested on subjects that I've never seen. Okay, Stephen, hopefully now you know that you can actually, don't need to learn them all. So if you have the ability to kind of neglect some subjects that you aren't familiar with, hopefully that gives you enough confidence to really hammer home on those strong subjects that we talked about for the A's and B's. So those subjects that you've never seen, those will definitely be your C's. And you're going to really focus on what your strengths are. So thank you, Stephen and Nancy, for those questions. And we've got Cheryl, who says spending too much time per question. Cheryl, thank you. That is really going to be based on how much getting more comfortable with the questions, and that's going to take practice. It's going to take practice getting used to the types of questions that NCEES will ask, and a good reference that I have for you is any book by PPI or Professional Publications Incorporated. You can go to ppitopass.com. And Michael Lindbergh is the author of all of those books, and those were the review materials that I used to pass the exam, and that's what I recommend to all of my students. They're the most comprehensive. He's been doing it the longest, and they've got a lot of great content writers on staff to help get the closest types of questions that you'll see, or the most relative questions that you'll see on the exam. So, so my recommendation for you is grab some of those books if you're taking the exam, and start to practice. Okay, well, thank you for the questions, everybody. Hopefully that helped. And it's time to hit the home stretch. So let's go ahead and talk about the most common mistake that engineers make when preparing for the exam, and this is a big one. So the biggest problem that engineers face is thinking too big, and I want to share an excerpt with you that best describes this problem as it applies to the FE exam from Sarah Kathleen Peck on her blog, itstartswith.com. Sarah writes, "Dream big, reach for the stars. The only limit is in your mind." How often do you hear these words? We're filled with the power of positive mantras in motivational texts, books, and seminars. The problem with expansive thinking, however, is that too big can be just as much of a problem. The problem of thinking too big, however, is that you'll forget to get started, or you'll be afraid of getting started. As you sketch your dreams for your life and career, you can have multiple jobs, you can own multiple businesses, make multiple projects. But dwelling in dreamland can hinder action. The longer you hold on to an idea, the more the idea becomes part of your identity, and the more wrapped up you become in making sure that the idea is what will become reality. Sometimes hope and patience can turn a dream into an enormous mental glorification, resulting in the worst sin of all, not starting. So does this sound familiar? Maybe some of you are struggling with procrastination when it comes to the FE exam. You keep telling yourself, I'll get to it later or next month, but it never arrives. When I graduated from college, I started to map out my career path and wanted to see what I needed to do to become successful. I thought about owning my own business or working my way up to becoming a principal. So I started breaking it down and said, what am I going to need to do to get there? I saw a lot of professional engineers, some with their MBAs, and I started to dream. And it quickly started to get really, really big. And the more I thought about it, the more I started thinking about how far away it was. And the goal kept getting further and further away. And I kept thinking, this is never going to happen. It's going to be 30 years before I reach that goal. It was very distracting and very debilitating. I never thought I was going to get there, and I didn't know where to start. But here's the thing. Dreaming has its place, and it never stops. You can only manage it. So what I tell all of my students is to stop thinking. Write down what your end goal is when considering the FE exam. So I want you to take a moment right now and grab a pen and paper or a notepad, or even on your computer. Just something to jot down a couple of quick notes. we're going to do a quick exercise. We're going to do a quick exercise. So step 1, write down what your end goal is when considering the FE exam. What do you hope to accomplish? Is it a promotion? Is it more money? Is it self-accomplishment? Maybe it's a new job. Maybe it's a new position. Just take a couple minutes right now and write down what that end goal is. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds, and then we'll continue on. Okay, so once you wrote down your end goal, I want you to write down how it would feel to achieve that goal. Feelings are very important to capture because feelings inspire action. Feelings remind you of what it's like to experience something. Your brain wants positive feelings. They want to experience it over and over again. Happiness, satisfaction. Think about what it would feel like to finally achieve your long-term goal and just experience it for a minute. And step 3, start to break down your goal even further. Start writing down micro goals of what you need to do to take steps to achieve that goal. It doesn't matter how many micro goals there may be, but there will probably be a few. And write down your feelings on how it would feel to achieve your micro goals. It could be getting a promotion or studying for 3 hours. It really doesn't matter. But the key is to just capture the feelings of achieving those goals. And finally, step 4. I want you to think about what your first action step needs to be to achieve your first micro goal, and when does it need to be completed by. If you're setting these goals, then you need to set a definitive end date. Otherwise, there's no urgency. And if you're really serious about completing this goal, then share it with someone. Did you know that according to the American Society of Training and Development, the probability of completing a goal if we hear an idea, it's only 10%. If we consciously decide to adopt it, the probability goes up to 25%. If we decide when we will do it, the probability goes up to 40%. If we plan how to do it, the probability goes up to 50%. If we commit to somebody else, the probability goes all the way up to 65%. But here's the thing, if you have a specific accountability appointment with someone, the person who you've committed to, the probability of us completing that goal goes all the way up to 95%. Now, those are some serious figures, and I bring this up because preparing for the FE exam, it's lonely. Not everyone has a study partner to study with, but at the very least, you should commit to somebody else what your intentions are. So logically, step number 5 is to commit to somebody else what your end goal is to make your goal more realistic. Okay, and now for the bonus material that I promised you. We are right at the tail end of this, so stick with me a couple more minutes. These are going to be great tools for you. I always love to make sure that my attendees leave my presentations with something tangible and useful that they can implement immediately. So what I'm going to show you are 3 tools that I use daily, and you can too to become more productive and create hyper-focused attention. And the great part is that these tools aren't just applicable for preparing for the FE exam. You can use these tools in your daily work routine too. The first tool is focusatwill.com, and this website is pretty amazing. This group of neuroscientists have found hard science to prove that listening to certain types of music improves our focus and extends our attention span. You can read all about it at the website, but the bottom line is they know exactly what you should be listening to give you the hyper-focused attention during your productive hours. Each piece of music is sequenced to a specific phase throughout the track to increase your brain stimulus, and a whole bunch of other scientific facts that I really don't understand. All I know is that it works really, really well. The second tool is the Momentum app for Google Chrome. Now, when I'm surfing the internet and my mind starts to wander to sites like Facebook or Huffington Post, I'll open up a new tab and boom, I'm reminded of what I should be doing. The Momentum app for Chrome will open up every time you start Chrome and ask you what your goal is for that day. Then every time you open up a new tab, it will remind you. So if you waste time on the internet and find it hard to stay focused, give this one a shot. And the third tool is headspace.com. Now, the word meditation gets misused and misconstrued in my opinion, so I like to use the words reflection and clarity. Call it whatever you want, but there are times that I just need to clear my brain. Some of the greatest leaders meditate daily, and even companies like Google, AOL, and Apple offer mindfulness and meditation classes for their employees. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. One of my goals is to perform some sort of mind-focusing clarity exercise every morning, and I've not yet achieved that goal. But every time I do it, I feel extremely relieved and refocused. There are a lot of services that will teach you to meditate or provide guided meditation, but the best one that I've found is Headspace.com. They offer a free Take 10 meditation course, which is 10 minutes per day for 10 days, and I highly recommend it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Before we get to Q&A, I just want to mention briefly again, if you are still interested in the FE exam, you can head over to my site, my video blog, dailyfeexamprep.com, and I do have a mailing list if you're interested in more training videos. But let's open up to any further Q&A.
Well, thank you so much, Joel, for sharing all those tips and tricks, your insights, your expertise, and telling us some terrific stories about your own personal experience as well. For those of you listening, if you could have seen us here in the webinar room, we were laughing very loudly but silently at the image of Joel in his exam situation. Hopefully your exam situation will go very positively thanks to the advice that Joel has shared. Clearly the exam is not simple, but your solid RIT foundation in engineering and the guidance that Joel just provided today is going to go a long way in preparing engineers for success in achieving this important certification. So if you still have questions, which I'm sure you do, you can type them into the chat box and we'll pitch them to Joel to answer. Of course, if you start thinking and the questions don't come right now, you can email them to us at ritalum@rit.edu, or you can tweet your questions to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we'll get your questions to Joel and he'll follow up. But we can take advantage of a little bit of time right now.
So Cheryl was asking what the books that we recommended. If you head to the site that I just shared, the link that I just shared, ppi2pass.com, that's the number 2, ppi2pass.com. Those were the books written by Michael Lindberg. They have all sorts of FE exam and PE exam training materials that you can use. So the link is in the chat box.
And it seems everyone is feeling pretty confident at this point. We're seeing lots of thank yous popping up in the chat box. Again, if you have additional questions, you can email them after the webinar closes to ritalum@rit.edu or tweet them to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we'll get those questions to Joel. And remember, all participants in today's webinar will receive an email from us in the next few days with a link to today's webinar recording, and that will be complete with the captioning. And you'll be able to rewatch this at your leisure. Joel certainly shared a great deal of detailed advice and information, and those slides, I believe, will come in very handy to you. And with that, many thanks, Joel, for being our distinguished speaker today. Thank you. Oh, wait, we've got one more question here. Let Joel take a look and digest it.
Okay, hang on. Okay, so Dennis had a comment. So he graduated from college almost 18 years ago. Oh, okay. Yeah, Dennis. So I will comment on that, and you are not alone. I just helped a student who had taken it 4 times previously. She emailed me last week, so this was her 5th time taking it. She finally passed, but you know, she kept buying more and more training manuals and more training materials. But the fact of the matter is, if you graduated from RIT, you are smart enough to pass this exam, and using strategies like this will help reshape your focus and really get you headed in the right direction. And so it's all about maximizing your strengths and honestly forgetting a lot of the subjects that you really don't need. So hopefully, I'm glad this helped, and I wish you luck, and yeah, well, thank you for the comment. We've got a couple more comments coming in. Yes, as the final goal of the course, of course, is to pass so we can reward ourselves with the 8-hour PE exam. Yes, absolutely. Why I created this strategy, just another quick note, why I created this strategy for the FE exam is because a lot of people get hung up on the FE exam. It's not necessarily the PE exam. It's really, the FE exam is more daunting than the PE exam because it covers subjects that you haven't really worked with in maybe 10, 15, or 20 years plus. And so people who have the experience to even sit for the PE exam can't pass the FE exam because they just, they haven't worked with those subjects in so long. So yes, absolutely, Dennis, I completely agree with you. Got a couple more comments here. Let me just read through them real quick. So why should I pursue an engineering license? From Chris. Chris, that's a great question, one that I get very often. You should check to see what industry that you are in and see if a licensed professional, a professional engineering license is worthwhile. At worst case, it gives you more credentials, and if you're looking to advance your career in any aspect or even change industries, having the PE after your initials are, it just makes you look that much more elite versus other engineers. Now, a main industry that uses professional engineering licenses are design engineers who need to stamp drawings. So if you're doing, I'll speak from experience, if you're doing HVAC design for mechanical heating and cooling systems, you need to have somebody who's licensed to stamp and approve the drawings to make sure that you're abiding by the codes and the regulations. And so you do need to have a license to do that. I know that for any sort of drawings, maybe not any sort of drawings, but another industry that I worked in was, I worked for a company called the Hilliard Corporation down in Elmira, and they had a licensed professional engineer to stamp their mechanical drawings, and they were doing parts for Rolls-Royce engines and a bunch of other high-tech stuff. So I do know that if you need to stamp any sort of drawings, then a professional engineering license is usually required. So thank you, Chris, for that comment. Carlton asks if this same strategy will work for the PE exam. Absolutely, it will work for the PE exam. Again, you just need to go grab the exam specifications so you know exactly which subjects are on it, figure out how many questions are on the exam, and kind of work backwards and figure out what your strongest ones. Now, the difference between the PE and the FE exam is the PE exam is actually open book. You can bring resources in and references, but it's also much more discipline specific. So, but yes, absolutely, this same strategy will work. So I didn't know this, North Carolina allows you an exemption without taking the FE exam if you have 20 years of experience. That's good to know. I didn't know that. So for people who might have 20 years of experience, then you can apply. You can certainly apply this for the PE exam. So I understand where your question's coming from, Carlton. Now, but yes, absolutely, this is not anything that works just for the FE exam. Thank you for the question.
And I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Many of the strategies that Joel has provided would apply not only to engineering exams, but life in general. I am certainly not an engineer, but I've taken copious notes on how to keep myself focused and achieving some pretty heady goals here. Maybe returning to school and getting a degree in engineering should be one of them. Anyway, so again, you're welcome to send further questions to us. We'll get them to Joel. We'll send out the link to the webinar to you shortly, and we hope that you'll all join us again. We'll be back again in January, on January 6th, with a presentation from another RIT alumnus, Chris Tarantino. He'll be presenting on how to manage communications during a crisis. Big or small communications will get you through most challenging situations. You'll be able to register for this webinar and more at rit.webex.com. And of course, we're always sending our promotional emails to you, reminding you to sign up.